"Pack your things and be out by Sunday," my son-in-law said, standing in the doorway of what used to be my daughter's childhood bedroom. "This is our house now, and we need the space." He didn't raise his voice. That was almost worse. He said it the way you'd tell someone the dry cleaning was ready. I was 63 years old, sitting on the edge of a twin bed holding a mug of coffee I hadn't touched. My daughter, my Claire, was standing right behind him. And she said nothing. "I want you to understand something before I go any further. I am not a man who asks for much. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county of Maricopa, Arizona. I worked overtime so my daughter could go to dance camp. I fixed her car twice in college and didn't call it a loan. When her mother passed, pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to funeral. I handled everything. The service, the estate, the selling of our house in Tempe, because the memories were too loud. I did all of it, and I didn't fall apart because Claire needed me not to. So when she asked me, 2 years ago, if I'd consider moving in with her and her husband, I thought it was her way of saying she needed me. I didn't think twice. Her husband's name is Derek. He's 41, sells commercial real estate, wears expensive watches he can't afford, and has a laugh that fills a room in a way that used to seem charming and later seemed like performance. When Claire first brought him home for Thanksgiving, this was maybe 7 years ago, I thought he was a little slick, but I figured that was just the sales background. You learn to read people differently as you get older. Some signals you dismiss too early. They had a 4-bedroom house in Chandler, about 20 minutes from the neighborhood where Claire grew up. Nice place. Desert landscaping, a pool, a 3-car garage. Derek kept half empty because he liked the way it looked. They had 2 kids. My grandchildren, Lily and Mason, 8 and 5, when I moved in. That mattered more to me than anything. My wife never got to know them well. I wanted to be present for all the years she missed. The arrangement was straightforward. I'd pay $1,400 a month toward household expenses. That's what Derek proposed, and I agreed without negotiating because it wasn't about the money. I had a pension from the county, Social Security, and about $900,000 in retirement accounts and investments. I never touched the investment accounts. I didn't need to. But Derek didn't know the exact number, and I saw no reason to volunteer it. What he did know was that I was comfortable, and comfortable, I would learn, was a word that meant something different to Derek than it did to me. The first year was fine, mostly. I had my own bathroom, a small sitting area where I kept my books, and I took the kids to school 3 days a week because Claire was working at a dental office, and Derek's hours were unpredictable. I cooked dinner twice a week. I fixed the irrigation system in the backyard that had been leaking since before I arrived. I was useful. I felt useful, which is not a small thing at 63. The trouble started quietly. It always does. Derek began making comments about noise, about how he needed the evenings to decompress and the TV in my room was too loud. I started using headphones. Then it was the refrigerator. He said I kept buying things that cluttered the shelves and could I maybe consolidate. I started buying less. Then it was my car in the driveway. He didn't like it blocking the view of the garage from the street, so I started parking on the far side, even though it meant walking further with groceries. Each thing, on its own, was nothing. I told myself that. But looking back, what he was doing was drawing a perimeter, shrinking the space I was allowed to exist in, one small rule at a time. Claire saw it and didn't see it. That's the only way I know how to describe it. She'd sometimes give me a look across the dinner table that told me she understood something was off. But she never said anything out loud. She had a way of smoothing Derek's edges in public and disappearing when his edges got sharper in private. The money conversation happened on a Tuesday in March. Derek had gotten home late, which usually meant a difficult day, and I had made a pot of chili because I knew he liked it. I thought it might help. He sat down, ate 2 bowls, and then leaned back and said very casually that he and Claire had been talking about refinancing the house, and they wondered if I might be willing to increase my monthly contribution to $2,200. I asked why. He said the rates had gone up. The payment was tighter than they'd planned, and since I was living here rent-free, essentially, it seemed fair. I reminded him I was paying $1,400 a month, which was what we'd agreed to. He waved his hand and said that was when things were different. I asked what was different. He said the economy, the rates, the cost of everything. He smiled when he said it, which was a thing he did when he wanted to signal that the conversation was already over. I told him I'd think about it. That night I called my old friend Ray, who I've known since our daughters were in Girl Scouts together in the 90s. Ray has the kind of bluntness that used to annoy me, and now I find completely essential. I told him the whole thing. He said, "You know what's happening, right?" I said I thought I did. He said, "They found out you have money, and now they're going to squeeze it out of you a little at a time until there's nothing left to squeeze." I told him he was being dramatic. He said, "Call me in 6 months." I agreed to the $2,200. I don't know why exactly. Maybe I thought it would reset something. Maybe I thought generosity would breed goodwill. I've read enough history to know better, but something about being inside a family situation makes you think different rules apply. The 6 months passed. Ray didn't have to say I told you so. By September, Derek had brought up a potential family investment. He framed it as an opportunity. His brother-in-law was opening a second location of his landscaping business and needed a capital partner. And wouldn't it be a great thing for the whole family if I came in for $40,000? He'd already drawn up a 1-page summary. He had it ready. He'd been planning this conversation. That was when something shifted in me. Not anger, not yet, something more like clarity. I told him I'd need time to review it. He said there was a timeline. I said that was unfortunate, and I excused myself and went to my room and sat in the dark for a while, thinking about my wife, about the house in Tempe we sold, about Lily and Mason, about the perimeter Derek had been drawing around me for more than a year. I didn't invest the $40,000. I told Derek the numbers didn't pencil out for me, which was honest. He was cold about it for 2 weeks. Claire gave me a careful hug in the kitchen one morning and said she hoped I understood they just wanted to include me. I said I understood. Then November came. It was a Saturday, the weekend before Thanksgiving. Lily had a dance recital in the afternoon, and we'd all agreed to go together, then come home and watch football and order pizza. It was the kind of day I'd moved here for. I was in the kitchen making coffee when Derek came in and shut the door behind him. He said Claire and he had discussed it, and they felt the arrangement wasn't working anymore. He said I had a different lifestyle, different hours, different habits, and it was creating tension in the household. He said they needed their privacy back. He said he thought I'd be more comfortable somewhere else. He said he'd appreciate it if I could be out by the first of the year. 6 weeks. I asked where Claire was. He said she was getting the kids ready. He said she agreed with him and just found it hard to say. I stood there with my coffee mug. The kitchen smelled like the candle Claire had lit on the counter, one of those apple cinnamon ones she'd bought for the season. I looked at the window over the sink. I replaced the caulking around that window myself in August because it was leaking when it rained. I said, "All right." He blinked. I think he'd expected more. I said it again. "All right, I'll make arrangements." And I walked back to my room and closed the door and called Ray. Ray, to his credit, did not say I told you so. He said, "What do you need?" I said I needed a real estate attorney who was discreet and a financial advisor who was good with account transfers. He said he knew both. He made the calls while I was on the other line with a property management company in Scottsdale. Here is the thing nobody tells you about having saved money your whole life. The options it gives you are almost invisible until you need them. And then all at once they become very real and very clear. I owned, outright, a 2-bedroom condominium in Scottsdale that I'd bought 12 years earlier as a rental investment. The tenants had moved out in August, and I hadn't relisted it because I hadn't decided what to do with it. I'd completely forgotten to mention it to Derek. I also had an account he didn't know about, a brokerage account I'd opened in my own name the year before my wife got sick when we were doing estate planning. It held just over $600,000 in index funds and a modest bond ladder. My pension was direct deposited to a separate checking account. My Social Security had a third account. Derek had seen one statement once about 18 months ago from a rollover IRA that had roughly $200,000 in it. That was the extent of what he knew. I spent the next 3 weeks being very quiet and very organized. I stopped paying the $2,200. I told Derek politely that since I was leaving in 6 weeks, it didn't make sense to continue. And that felt fair. He didn't push back. I think he was just relieved I was going. I had the condo repainted and some minor repairs done. I bought new furniture. I arranged my mail forwarding. I called Lily's school and updated my contact card so that I could stay involved in her life regardless of what happened with her parents. I took Mason to the Science Museum the Saturday before I left. Just the two of us. An afternoon I will not forget, and I told him I was going to have my own place now, and he could come sleep over whenever his mom said it was okay. He asked if I'd have a dog. I said I was thinking about it. He said I should get a big one. I left on a Thursday, 10 days before the first of the year. I didn't make a speech. I hugged the kids. Claire cried in the driveway and said she was sorry, and I told her I loved her and I meant it. Derek shook my hand. I put the last box in my truck and drove to Scottsdale. The condo was quiet. The winter light came through the west windows in the late afternoon in a way I hadn't remembered. I sat in a new chair I'd picked out myself, with no one's input, and drank a glass of iced tea and felt, for the first time in 2 years, like I could breathe at my own pace. The first call came 11 days later. It was Claire. She said Derek had been trying to reach me and I hadn't responded to his texts. I said I'd seen them and would get back to him when I was ready. She said he was upset about the monthly payments stopping and had expected me to pay through January at least. I said the understanding had been that I was leaving by the 1st, and I'd left a little early, so I didn't think I owed anything beyond what I'd already paid. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said Derek had mentioned the investment I'd declined, and I could hear that she was reading from something, or at least rehearsing. She said they were in a difficult position with the refinance, and if there was any way I could reconsider. I told her I loved her. I told her I'd love to have her and the kids over for dinner sometime soon. I told her I wasn't in a position to make financial commitments to their household, and I told her that if she needed to talk, just talk, not about money. I was here. She called back 3 days later, this time without the script. She cried for a long time and told me she'd known something was wrong for over a year and hadn't known how to say it. She said Derek had told her I was sitting on at least $1 million and had acted like I was being selfish by not helping more. I didn't correct the figure. I just listened. Derek sent a long text the following week. I read it once and didn't respond. It said things about family obligation and about how I'd been basically a guest in their home and hadn't contributed fairly and that my behavior was damaging to their family. It was the kind of text a person writes when they're trying to feel righteous about something they know was wrong. I'd seen that kind of thing before. I saved it and moved on. What I did not do, and I want to be clear about this, was cut my daughter off. I did not cut off my grandchildren. Lily came for a weekend in February and we made pancakes on Saturday morning and watched a movie, and I took her to a bookstore and told her to pick 3 books, anything she wanted. Mason came the following month, and yes, I had gotten a dog by then, a 3-year-old rescue lab named George, who Mason immediately claimed as his own personal animal. I had no objection. What I did change was the financial architecture around my estate. I met with my attorney, not the one Derek knew I'd used before, a different one, out of Phoenix, and I revised my will completely. I established 2 education trusts, one for Lily and one for Mason, each funded and protected regardless of what happened between their parents and me. I named a trustee outside the family to administer them. Those accounts are not accessible to Derek under any circumstance, and Claire would have to go through the trustee to request distributions, which were specified to be for education expenses only. The rest of my estate I restructured. I'm not going to detail every decision because some of it is still evolving, and some of it is frankly my own business. What I will say is that Derek's name appears nowhere in any document with my signature on it, and that is not bitterness. That is clarity. Claire asked me once, maybe 4 months after I moved out, if I was angry at her. We were sitting on my little patio watching George chase a lizard along the wall. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I told her I wasn't angry, not really. I told her I was disappointed. Not in the way a parent is disappointed in a child who failed a test, but in the quieter way you feel when you realize someone you love chose comfort over honesty, and you understand why, even if it cost you something. She said she was sorry. She said it the way she used to say it when she was 12 and had broken something, full and real and a little scared. I told her sorry wasn't what I needed. What I needed was for her to know her own mind going forward, to say the true thing even when it was harder. She was my daughter and I was going to love her until I didn't have any breath left to do it with. But I was not going to fund a life that didn't have room for me in it. That was done. She nodded. George came back with a stick he'd found somewhere and dropped it at her feet, and she laughed, and so did I. And we sat there another hour while the sun dropped behind the McDowell Mountains and turned everything that particular shade of Arizona orange that you can't describe to people who haven't seen it. I think about my wife sometimes in the evenings. I think about what she would have made of all of it. She was a more patient person than I am, but she had a line. And when people crossed it, she went very still in a way that was much more frightening than anger. I think she would have gone still somewhere around the $40,000 conversation. I think she would have said, in that quiet way of hers, that love doesn't require you to prove it with a check. She was usually right about things like that. I am 64 now. I wake up at 6 most mornings and make real coffee, the kind that takes a few minutes, and I sit with George and read for an hour before I do anything else. I play golf on Fridays with Ray and 2 other men I've known for decades. And afterward, we sit in a clubhouse and argue about nothing important. I volunteer 2 mornings a week with a youth engineering program at a middle school in Mesa. Kids building things, solving things, learning that their hands and their minds can work together. I find that more satisfying than I expected. Derek and I have not spoken since the text. I have no plans to change that. Claire comes for dinner about twice a month. She is starting to say the true things more often. It is slow, and it is not linear, but I see it happening, and it is enough for now. Lily is in 4th grade and has decided she wants to be a marine biologist. Mason lost his first tooth last month and called me immediately before his parents to report the news. George Frisbard has settled into a life of tremendous leisure and occasional lizard chasing that I can only admire. I did not set out to teach anyone a lesson. I want to be honest about that. I set out to live the years I have left without apologizing for taking up space. If that turned out to have consequences for people who'd been counting on my staying small and quiet and grateful, that wasn't something I planned. It was just what happened when I stopped. And I'll tell you, the apple cinnamon candle smell is mostly gone from my memory now. What I remember instead is the way the light came through those west windows on my first afternoon alone, and how I sat in my own chair and felt the specific, quiet weight of a life that was entirely mine again. That's not a small thing. At 64, I can tell you that's just about everything. I've been sitting with this long enough now to say something honest about it. Not the version where I'm entirely the wronged party and they're entirely the villains, but the real version, which is messier and probably more useful. What Derek did was wrong, but what made it possible was something I allowed to build, one small concession at a time, over more than a year. I told myself each thing was minor. The parking spot, the refrigerator, the noise, and each one was minor, individually. But I was treating the symptoms and ignoring what they pointed to, which was a person who had decided I was a resource to be managed rather than a father to be respected. That kind of clarity, when it finally comes, doesn't feel like revelation. It feels like something you already knew and had been too hopeful to act on. There's a version of me that stays, that pays the $2,200, then the next thing, then the next, shrinking a little more each time, telling himself it's the loving choice. I understand that version. I was close to being him, But I've lived long enough to know that there's nothing loving about disappearing yourself to keep the peace in a room that was never really yours to begin with. The thing I keep coming back to is the difference between being good and being used. I was a good father. I paid for things, fixed things, showed up, stayed present, and somewhere in that long record of showing up, Derek had concluded that I would keep showing up no matter what he did, because that's what good people do. He mistook decency for limitlessness. That was his error, letting him make it unchallenged for as long as I did. That was mine. What I had to find, and what I think anyone in a version of this situation has to find, is the difference between patience and passivity. Patience is a choice you make actively, with your eyes open, because you believe the situation can improve. Passivity is what happens when you stop believing that and keep going anyway, because stopping feels too hard. I was patient for about 6 months. I was passive for another year after that, and I knew it, and I kept telling myself it was patience. When I finally left, I didn't leave in anger. That's the part that surprised me most about myself. I left because I looked at the situation clearly, at the $40,000 ask, at the parking spot, at the caulking I'd replaced in a window of a house that was already telling me to go. And I made a decision based on what was actually true instead of what I hoped might become true. That's not cold, that's the hardest kind of thinking there is. It requires you to look at someone you love, see them plainly, and choose reality over the story you'd preferred. And the practical things, the accounts, the will, the trusts for Lily and Mason, those weren't revenge. I want to be clear about that. They were just what happened when I stopped organizing my life around other people's expectations of my generosity. The money was always mine. I'd earned it across 3 decades of early mornings and deferred pleasures in a wife I miss every single day. What changed was simply that I stopped pretending it was a shared resource for people who had shown me, very plainly, that they didn't consider my presence a resource worth keeping. Lily still calls me on the weekends. Mason claimed George as his own, and I've never argued the point. Claire is learning, slowly, to say what she actually means. That's enough. That's more than enough. Some things repair. Some things change shape into something you didn't expect, but can live with. And some things you simply carry forward, a little wiser, into the time you have left.